jQuery Mobile, Progressive Enhancement with HTML5, was presented as part of the Flash in the City conference. This presentation was originally recorded on June 11, 2011, in New York City.
I'm just going to start so you guys can get out and get something to eat. Stragglers are welcome to come in. Today, I am going to be talking about jQuery Mobile and Progressive Enhancement with HTML5. I hope to give a brief overview of what the framework has to offer and kind of a nuts and bolts of what's there and what you can work with to get a web-based mobile application up and running really quickly. And then hopefully get into the context of taking an existing application out of the normal web browser of a device and adding it to your phone as what's considered a web app and launched in its own UI web view. And then hopefully also, if there's time, discuss how to take an existing jQuery mobile app and using software tools to deploy it natively to the device. Just a quick overview of what I mean by progressive enhancement. It's sort of this principle in which jQuery Mobile is being developed and on this foundation of semantic HTML, and with that it brings some new parts of HTML5 to it, specifically the datasets attribute. And then it provides a layer of presentation using CSS, and with that some of the CSS3 parts such as media queries and transitions and drop shadows. And then it ties it together with JavaScript to bring in a certain level of behavior, and there was no good badge to describe that, so I just threw it in there. Just a quick overview of who I am, because no one introduced me there. So my name is Todd Anderson. I'm a senior software engineer over at Infrared5 up in Boston. I am originally from New Jersey, Hightstown, Exit 8. And even though I'm in Boston now, I still consider New York City the city, and I love coming down here. And I want to thank Elad and Jose for having me, and hopefully you will too. And up there is my contact information and just a brief background of what I've done. I've had the esteemed pleasure of being the co-author on several books that target the Flash platform, specifically Air, and then the Flex cookbooks from O'Reilly. So I have this long history of developing applications for the Flash platform, and my day job is architecting and developing pretty large-scale enterprise-level Flex applications. But I got into jQuery Mobile around October or November of last year when it was in Alpha 2 release, and was quickly taken by the way they went about designing it and having it easily available to create a mobile application that targets the web. And because I like to punish myself with less sleep, I started doing more and more with it, and actually had a long-winded series of blog posts that was including jQuery Mobile incorporated with a CouchDB backend, and that's on my blog, and continues to be the most frequented pages on my blog, which was a signal that Flash was dead and I needed to move on, which I'm kidding, of course. I think Flash is still very much alive, and I'm heavily invested in it. But I got into jQuery Mobile, this mobile framework, and just a brief overview of what it is. It's this a JavaScript-based mobile framework that's being developed by the Filament Group up in Boston. It's currently at Alpha 4.1. They've been talking about going into beta for some time, and it's open source, so you can go to GitHub and see what they're currently working on. So I'm going to present what they consider to be the most stable build, which is freely downloadable without having to go to GitHub, and that's the 4.1. And it's a mobile framework per se that's built off of jQuery. And if anybody knows jQuery, just a quick hands of who consider themselves developers, and those that are designers, and you can raise your hand for both. Okay, mainly developers. Okay, so if you're unfamiliar with jQuery, the way I take it is more of an AJAX and DOM manipulation library built on JavaScript. And the jQuery mobile framework is built on top of that, and it also incorporates another part from jQuery UI, specifically the widget. And it's another presentation to get into widgets and plugins, but you can think of a widget as a decorator for your element that will provide like another level of presentation and behavior, and it sometimes can also expose another layer of API in which you can interact and communicate with that element. So it's being developed, and it's being developed as cross-platform, cross-browser, cross-device, and they have this A grading system for the browser support that's very similar to Yahoo's YUI grading system, which is for the desktop browsers. And this shows all the browsers that they're currently targeting and on all the devices. And the A denotes that at very least the browser can support media queries, and they're actively testing and developing against it. And the B is denotes that the browser doesn't have enough market share in which they can devote enough time to actively test and develop against it, but doesn't mean that it's not capable. And then the C denotes that the browser doesn't support media queries, and that the framework will only have some sort of support for that browser, which is sort of good along with this principle of progressive enhancement. They also have graceful degradation, in which you might see some enhancement to your application if you still use these browsers. However, it won't have the same full effect as if you had a grade A browser. So just a quick rundown of what progressive enhancement is, and the principle of progressive enhancement is that the way I take it is that your content is considered king, and the information and what you want available to a user should always be available and not relying on CSS or JavaScript. So it's still indexable, searchable. If somebody wants to find something, it's still available. Whether or not they have a grade A or grade C browser, they'll still be able to access that information. And the way that the jQuery mobile framework does this in a sort of a semantic way is by assigning this new data set, or using this new data set attribute to assign what is considered roles in which the framework will recognize. We'll see, I'll show some examples, but it will also use a CS3 to provide niceties and sort of presentation, and it ties it all together with what is considered unobtrusive JavaScript, which, as I mentioned before, if the browser was incapable or they had JavaScript turned off, you're not depriving the user from accessing that content strictly because you're not. You might use JavaScript to hide and show the content if they are capable, but if you had JavaScript turned off, that content would still be available in the markup, valid, clean markup, and considered indexable and searchable for that information. So just because I'm a visual person, I came up with a quick example. So just to start off with, this would be the base of the core of progressive enhancement. This would be considered your content, and you wanted a user to be able to find information about a waterfall. In this case, we just have an image, but we could have some textual information, and they come here to your site and they say, oh, and now I know what a waterfall is. It's water falling over another object. And then you put on a level of presentation on top of that, and you throw in a sandwich next to the waterfall, and people might stay a little longer. I know I might stay until like the sandwich is gone or something. And then you throw in a level of pizzazz and a certain behavior along with that, and then you've got something that the user will keep coming back to. But still, if their browser is incapable, that information about the waterfall is still there. And now we see that water can also fall over Tom Selleck. But there was another presentation by the architect at Yahoo named Nicholas Zakas, who gave a presentation on progressive enhancement. And in that presentation, he had a slide from a quote from a comedian whose name I can't remember. But it basically said that escalators never break; they just become stairs, which is a great concept to think of about progressive enhancement, because the information, the ability to go from A to B, will always be available to the user. And all the escalator brings is another level of presentation, rubber handles and graded steps to denote that there's probably some type of animated motion that will ease the progression from A to B. But if it all breaks down, they don't have JavaScript turned on, they have a great C browser, the user is still going to be able to go from one level to the other. So how does the framework do this? It uses, I have to add, someone should have opened my water. It uses, it uses the new dataset attribute from the HTML5 spec. And typically when you use, excuse me, the new dataset attribute is basically a data store that is still considered a valid markup. So your engine, the browser engine, should overlook it and still be available in the markup. And the way that the jQuery mobile framework uses this data asset or data set is to use what's considered mainly as roles, and we'll assign a role to an element, and then once the framework is loaded in, we'll parse your DOM and assign a level of presentation and behavior using that. So at the heart of a data role is really, the first thing is a page. So an application or a site is made up of a series of pages. And by setting a page within the jQuery mobile framework, you just set a data role of page. So in this example, you'll see at the top what could be considered like a grade C browser or with JavaScript turned off. And then the one at the bottom is more lush and inviting and uses the framework to enhance the experience. And in that example, you'll see the needed parts of working with a jQuery mobile application, and it's the new doc type, the CSS, and jQuery mobile scripts. So like I said, jQuery mobile is actually built on top of jQuery, which is an Ajax and DOM manipulation library, and jQuery mobile itself is more of a navigational and UI enhancement library on top of that. So within the idea of a data role page, you have some optional extra data roles that you can use, and they're independent of each other and optional. So you don't need a content to have a header, and you don't need a footer to have a content. But typically you would at least have a content, which is sort of like the view area of your page, and I often use a header, which would denote your current location within that application. So I'm going to run a quick demo of what that all looks like. If we go into here and we see our markup, and we see the div declared with the data role of page, and I have my 3 divs, the header and the content and the footer. And if I run that real quick, and Safari hates me. Safari quit on me. If I run that real quick and we open up the developer tools, we'd see that what was once this clean semantic HTML, which just described the roles of the type of elements, was parsed by the framework and assigned another level of presentation. You see now this is the active DOM, and it has classes defined on it, and in some instances it has roles which are more pertaining to ARIA, which I hope to get on to later. But you see that the framework, once it's loaded into the page, will inspect the DOM and parse all your pages that you've declared, and then store them and hide them visually, and then when you navigate from one to the other, will transition into all the pages that you have declared internally. So if we go back here, with a page comes a different type of context of internal and external, and when you declare multiple internal pages within a single document, you typically assign an ID, and you can navigate from one page to the other using the hash and then the ID of the page you want to go to. But there's also, I like that. There's also an external page in which you're actually referencing another document in another location. And in that context, if you the framework by default loads that document using AJAX, parses its DOM, and actually throws it onto the current DOM that it resides. But you can set the data AJAX to false or rel to external, and that'll link as a normal link to that new document. Now, one thing to remember when you're bringing in external documents or navigating to external documents is that you can only have one page to find when you have the data AJAX as true, which is the default, in which the framework will load it in, parse it, and drop it on the current DOM. If you have more than one page, it gets a little wonky. But if you have an external page, you can have, as many pages as declared. And with that comes another context of what the markup looks like in the page. And I have a quick example just to go through it. I'm going to try Safari again. But here you see this is 2 internal pages declared. And I just have an ID on each of them. And I am linking to each one using this hash. So if we just run this real quick, we see we can go from one page to the other internally. And it will add this back button, but that's in the current version. What's in GitHub, there's been talk of taking that away because it adds another layer of navigation that the browser already has. So it kind of breaks the user experience of which one do I actually get to use, which both of them will work the same. But they're thinking of taking that out. So that's something to remember, that some of these demos I'm showing you are considered the stable build, but there might be some slight changes if you go and check it out in a little bit. So with an external page, here I'm going directly to sandwich ajax.html, and if we open that up, we see that we don't have to declare the CSS and the scripts because the framework will load that document in and parse its DOM, find that page, and throw it onto its current DOM. I just wanted to show you really quickly what that would look like, trusting Safari again. So if we open up developer tools and we look at what's currently on the DOM, we see just the single page here, select, and this other div is the loading bar, which you may see, but we only have one page declared. And if we go and navigate to the next page, you'll see that we now have 2 pages in there. And so it's loaded up that external document, parsed the DOM, and dropped it on the current DOM. And the thing to remember with the current 4.1 is that it will also consider that cache. So next time you link to it, it won't go back over the network and try to get that document and parse it again. It'll say, oh, I already have it in my DOM, so I'm just going to take you there. But there is some work in GitHub where they're going to use a data cache from what I take, and you could set the cache level on pages. That's a quick example of external pages that are navigated to and loaded internally. And with an example of another external page with the data AJAX to false, you'll see that this page, I'm linking to sandwich no ajax.html, and within that external page, I actually do have to declare the CSS and the scripts, because the window itself is not going to remember what you loaded before, and the framework's not going to be that obtrusive to keep itself in memory between these different documents. So it will be taking you to another location. So you could think of, I mentioned widgets before, and just to recap it, they're sort of element decorators that provide a presentation and a behavioral layer. And you can think of pages as being widgets, which they pretty much are. But the framework also offers some more elements that are typical within a mobile application, such as your buttons and your control bars, or your control groups and your nav bars, and your toolbars, which are the header and footer. And then I love how, I'll get into it later, but I like how it works with forms, because it actually widgetizes the form elements and leaves the form alone. And then it widgetizes lists, but in a sense it actually you do set a role to the list, but it actually also inspects the DOM and decides which item renderer you actually want to use, which is pretty cool. I hope I can get into that. So first off is your common button, and just like we did with a page, you just set a data role of button to usually a link. You can do it to anything, but I think that kind of breaks the semantic rule of what something should denote in your markup. So usually I do a link, and the framework will also find the button element and turn that into a button as well. And you don't have to define a new data role on that. And with the button comes the other data attributes, such as the data icon and the data icon pause. And the data icon is pretty cool. And the framework actually just loads in a single picture, and then with CSS, it depending on the string that you provide in data icon, it'll locate that image that you want to render using CSS. So it's very easy to create your own custom icons and not get in the way of the framework itself, because all you're doing is updating the CSS, which is pretty cool. And with the data icon position, you can set it right to left and no text. And I have a rather large button demo, as most people do. And I didn't want to go through all the slides of what a button can do, because it gets rather boring. But I just wanted to show you some quick things of what buttons are, and the context of how they can be laid out, and the context in which they can be associated with each other. So at the top is a very basic button, just with a link with a data role of button. And you can assign, as I said, data icon and data icon position, but you can also set a data inline where the framework will actually go and parse that DOM and inspect each sibling and find out how you want to lay out buttons. And then you have the widget control group, which takes a group of buttons and actually provides a different layer of UI enhancement on those buttons to denote some sort of association between all of them. And then you can actually use, technically this might be breaking the semantics of HTML, because or the foundation of progressive enhancement, because you are assigning classes directly. But you can use this gridding system that they use internally for other widgets by yourself and provide a layout for these buttons. So if we just run this real quick, we'll see the first button that I declared actually grows horizontally in the viewport, the width of it. And when you set a data inline, the buttons actually grow to the content with the size to the content within the button. And then a control group, you can do horizontal or vertical, and it has this new look and feel of maybe the buttons being associated and being a way to link to other places. And then you can use the data grid or the gridding system classes directly, and the A to D, it's usually a UI grid and UI block with an alphabet character. I have 5 minutes. Okay. All right. That was shock. So I'll just skip all that and show you another widget called navbar, which you can think of it in the context of a UI tab navigator that you're used to, and that internally will parse the DOM and actually assign those classes that I just showed with that button with the UI gridding system. So forms, I don't have much time, I guess, and I know a lot of people are concerned with forms, so I just wanted to talk a little bit about how the framework works. Is that you actually declare a form as you normally would. So with the idea, this is a great example of progressive enhancement, because you're still declaring a form as a user would without any knowledge of what kind of browser they're going to be using. So you're still providing them a way to fill out this form, even if they have a grade C browser or they have JavaScript turned off. So you still declare it as you normally would. You're not using any new data roles per se on the elements themselves. And the framework itself is actually parsing the contents within the form and assigning that presentation and level of behavior, which is pretty cool. And I just wanted to show you. This is ripped right from jQuery mobile site. And so all I declared was just this form and filled out the labels and inputs as you normally would. and you get this nice presentation over the elements. Text area is pretty cool because it actually auto sizes, and you have your sliders and your switches and your checkboxes and radios and what have you. And one thing to note is that with these select items, they actually default, the framework actually defaults to the native select list item of the browser, which is a pretty nice approach. On here, it looks terrible because we've got this large font size and this new UI feel, and we have this desktop select menu. But if we go over to the iOS simulator and run that, if we go down here, and we'll see that it actually uses the native select menu from the browser. So a user is still familiar with how they're filling out the form. And I think with some announcement from Apple last week, there's going to be more of this native list selection, because I don't think currently you can do date and time, and the jQuery mobile framework is working on some components that allow for that, but I think with the update to Safari, you're actually going to be able to use these native calendars and stuff like that, which is pretty cool. But if you don't want to use the native menu, jQuery mobile actually has a custom list menu, which will provide a more unified look and feel for the select menu, if you prefer. And before I run out of time, I just wanted to touch on the ability of being able to set things as considered native, or having the framework overlook your element when it's being parsed and still allow the browser to render it as it normally would. So if I set a data role of none, say on a button element, which I showed before, the framework would automatically turn a button into this button that has a nice rounded corner. If you set a data role of none, the framework would just overlook it when it's parsing and widgetizing all these elements, which is pretty neat. So I had a lot more, but I think we're running out of time. Is there any questions before they cut the cord? All right, then I'm going to go back all the way. Yeah. Well, it's great that I ran through that because I don't know if people find forms boring. But lists are exciting, right? Am I right? Look at this guy. All right, he's excited for 15 minutes on lists. All right. So the way you also have a context of setting a data role to a list, but really what the framework does is take the container of the list and does provide a level of enhancement, but actually on the list items themselves. And depending on how you declare your markup, there's actually some default item renderers that come with the framework, which is pretty cool. And it also, because you're not assigning new data roles to the list item renderers themselves, you're just setting it on the list item container, and the framework is deciphering from your markup what list item you want to provide. It's very easy to create your own custom ones, and I've done so with jQuery template and Mustache and things like that. So it's very cool, and I'm glad I get to show this because I thought I would deprive this young gentleman over here of this. So if we just take, this is also what I wanted to show about progressive enhancement. If we just take out this data role, we're still going to provide the user with a list and a way to navigate to wherever location these are. So all you're doing is defining on that list of elements. Sorry, let me close all these out. All you're defining on this list of elements is that you want to save your document before you run it, and right out of the box of just setting a data role on the UL or OL, you see all your list items actually have this new look and feel, and actually if you have a link within it, it will display this indicator to the right that it denotes that it's going somewhere else within your application, which is pretty neat. And what I was talking about as far as the framework being able to parse the list item and recognize what you've declared and provide an item renderer for that, right here, all I have is a link with an image defined first, and it'll actually provide to me a thumbnail list item renderer with 80 by 80 by default, which is pretty cool. I mean, right out of the box, I didn't have to send any classes or any new roles for this new list item renderer. It just recognized the way it was, and it actually goes about positioning here. I didn't have to set any styles to get a header above the plain text and stuff. And you can set a class that will set it to a small UI icon, which is 16 by 16. So it's pretty basic. And you also have the what's considered split button lists, in which you can define two links, and it'll instinctually know that I don't know if anybody's familiar with a split button list, but usually it's usually a link that takes you to a detail on the left, and then a quick link to a buy to take you to a store right now. So if we just ran that, you'll see all I did was declare two links and with content in the first one, and it automatically knew how to present that list item renderer for you. And also on this list, I forgot I had the data filter set to true. I just set that on top of the list, and right there I automatically get filtering on all the list items. And this works great on desktop, but I wouldn't recommend opening it on a device as of yet. All right, so themes. What time is it? All right, so themes. Right out of the box, jQuery Mobile Framework provides what's considered color swatches, and that's based on this alphabet character of currently what's in the default CSS is A to E. And we've pretty much seen A and D in places in the demos, but you have this available to you, and you also have the ability to add up to 26, as many as you want, so from F to Z within that default theme, and you can define your color swatches that you want to use within your application. One thing to know is to not do a wraparound and start doing AA. It only takes a single alphabet character. And if you start to wrap around, the application starts to get a little too deep, and people don't want to think when they use your application. And they also have what is considered themes. So right out of the box, you get a default CSS, which is that nice, this nice gray and black, which all designers love. And they have another one called Valencia, which is more of it's this hideous orange and yellow and sharp cornered ones, but it's more as a template for you to be able to take what's existing there and be able to create your own. So you don't have to load in the default CSS. You can make all these modifications in your own CSS and create this new look and feel for your application. Because that's the way it's running is using JavaScript, it's actually just assigning classes for the presentation. So as long as you're keeping the same class declarations within the CSS, it's just going to be applying that style, which is pretty neat. I'm going to talk about this just really quick, and then I'll open up for questions. But I know the Filament group is very adamant on bringing accessibility to the framework too, which is a great initiative, and I've seen some great presentations by people from the Filament group. And they're trying to adhere to this YARIA, which is the Web Accessibility Initiative of Accessible Rich Internet Applications. And it's really a specification that defines certain roles and states and properties for accessibility and a keyboard navigation, and what's considered live regions, which is content that's updated dynamically, such as we see with the popular Ajax sites. And this guy named Gez Lemon wrote a great article on that. You should go check it out. But the group is very actively not only building this framework on the principle of progressive enhancement, but also keeping in mind accessibility, which I commend them for, and it's just great. So before they cut the mic, are there any questions? I know I went a little fast there. All these slides and demos will be available on my site. Yes? I do not know that. They keep saying, the end of this month, every month, and they've said that since like December. So I don't know. I don't know. Even though I'm up in Boston, I still have never met the guys at Filament Group. But you can follow. It's open source, so you can definitely follow the GitHub and see how many tickets are still remaining and how closer they're getting to at least a beta release. Any other questions? Chuck?
Can you take a website of jQuery mobile and make it a web app on like an iPad?
Yes.
Does it retain all the navigation and everything?
Yes. Well, there's a couple different ways you can think of it. You can actually, there's what's considered a web app, where I don't know if you've ever gone to a site and you've actually said, like, you've clicked the menu and said add to home screen, and that becomes what's considered a web app, and that'll run in its own UI web view, and you could easily just have that available, and there's some metadata that you can add to make it nice. But there's also some software tools that I tested with, and these two were the easiest to get up and running with a native jQuery mobile application, existing one. All I did was take it and dropped it into PhoneGap. Is this a suite of templates in which you can add to an IDE and export like a native installer, and it uses JavaScript and HTML. And all I did was just take my existing jQuery mobile app and dropped it in there and published it, and it was ready to go. Now, that's one thing to consider when I was talking about the back button, is that you'll miss that back navigation with the browser that you have when you're looking at it on the browser of your device. So that back button will stay with the mobile framework. It'll just be off by default in the context that most people are going to be developing for the browser. But it'll still be available to you. And an easy way to test, especially with a web app, is this Window Navigator standalone, which is, once it's on the home screen, that if that property is true, it's considered on the home screen and not within the browser. And you can easily test for that and then decide whether or not to show a back button, because the back button's not going to be available there. Yeah. So yeah, PhoneGap and Air were the easiest. That's just to take an existing application, drop it in, publish it. And with Air, I used the stage web view and just pointed to the main file and was up and running. The only thing with Air is the communication between Ajax, between JavaScript and ActionScript is a little iffy, and Sean Voisin wrote an article about that communication. And I've gotten it to work sometimes and sometimes not. So the way that PhoneGap works is you have this another level of device API that you can access using the PhoneGap, but it's a little harder with Adobe Air. Yeah. There's also a bunch of other ones that I was going to talk about, but all these slides will be available, and the demos will be available on my site. Are there any other questions? Yes? No. I mean, that's what I wanted to explain about the jQuery mobile framework. Is it's not an application framework per se. It's more of a navigational and UI enhancement framework. So you're not going to get any of that structure, or you're not going to have this MVC and MVVM layer on top that's going to organize your application. You can certainly add those libraries, but really it's a navigational and UI enhancement framework built on top of jQuery, which is an Ajax and DOM manipulation framework. So it's really just open to how you can easily develop a quick application using semantic HTML and presentation and this JavaScript. And in most of the demos that you saw, I didn't even have to do a lick of JavaScript to get it up and running, which I don't like the camp of easy no-code thing, but because I do enjoy JavaScript, but it's fairly easy just to do it declaratively and cleanly in HTML and have your application just run and be available to any user who doesn't have the capability to run the framework, which is pretty cool. Any other questions? All right, get out of here, you crazy people. Thank you.